Hey up. Right, as promised, fitting videos for shocks on the Royal Enfield Classic 500. Now in this case I'm obviously showing you how to fit the HAGON Custom shop shocks, but obviously the fitting is the same for any twin shock absorber setup for the Classic 500. What I'm going to show you here isn't necessarily a textbook example of how to do it. I fitted this on a Sunday where we're supposed to be going out. I didn't allocate an awful lot of time for filming it because, you know, swapping shocks on a bike is child's play. I've lost count of the amount of times I've done it. Normally it's a 15 or 20 minute job, but the bullet threw up one or two googlies, as she often does, bless her. And although in my defence I will say everything worked out perfectly well, some people might consider that I haven't exactly done everything in the correct order. But at the very least, this video will show you that everything that you need to know for installation, and you can use your own grey matter to decide which way is best to do it for you. Before we get into it, can I ask you, if you like this video, please leave a like. And if you're a loser with a gentleman's sausage, which is normally of a size seen on the end of a cocktail stick, feel free to leave a dislike. I won't hold it against you. Coincidentally, while we're on the topic of sausages, yesterday afternoon I was thumbing through a copy of the amalgamated North and Northeast Gourmet Sausage Producer and Pig Breeders Monthly. Now I hasten to add, it wasn't my copy, I was just reading it for a friend. And I came across an article covering a reader's survey that they carried out a few months ago on erectile dysfunction among readers, because apparently this is a bit of a problem among pig breeders. Now this survey gave some very revealing results, and honestly I'm not making this up. I'm as surprised as you're going to be. But it turns out that 8 out of 10 pig breeders who were undergoing treatment for erectile dysfunction went into a complete remission within 3 months of subscribing to this channel, and no longer had to seek any further medical intervention. It was also hypothesised that for gentlemen of a certain age, subscribing to this channel may actually prevent such problems in the future. So do yourself a favour, subscribe to Uncle Stu's Video Emporium of Motorcycle Erotica for a guaranteed trouble-free life in the bedroom department. Actually, that makes sense as to why wives don't like the husbands watching this channel now. Moving on. Now, I'm guessing this is a bit of a throwback from the past in that the mounting system for the shocks on the Bullet is a little bit different from, you know, modern bikes or conventional bike setups. Ordinarily, the shocks will be mounted on mounting posts which are welded onto the swing arm and onto the frame. Whereas on the Bullet there are 2 mounting brackets, one on the swing arm and one on the frame, that the eyelets of the shock absorber insert into and are then secured in place with a shouldered bolt. I don't consider that this is a worse or better mounting system than any other, it's just different, but it does complicate the procedure slightly. Now add to this the fact that the top mounting bolt pulls out towards the mudguard, so the mudguard is in the way. This also means that you have to unfasten the mudguard and drop it down to give you enough clearance to withdraw and then reinsert those top shock mounting bolts. Now in my case I was sort of hoping for some miracle to present itself so that I wouldn't have to unfasten the mudguard and drop it down, because I was under pressure to go out clothes shopping. And as I've got these pannier racks fitted on the Bullet, it also meant that they would have to be removed in order to facilitate that. But in the end no miracle did present itself, so I had to remove those racks in order to be able to unsecure the rear mudguard and drop it down. There's no other way of doing it. So in retrospect, this is what I would advise, although this is not the way around that I did it. The first thing to do if you have those luggage racks fitted is remove them. Don't replace the fasteners after you've removed them, because those fasteners need to remain off in order to continue with this procedure. You need to remove all the fasteners from the rear mudguard stay in order to get that mudguard free so that you can manipulate it in order to get those top shock bolts out. The stay is secured in two places, one just behind the rear foot pegs that I've just shown you, and the other one is just behind the seat spring mounting bolts. And once you've removed all four fasteners, that's one top and one bottom on each side, you should then be free to drop the rear mudguard down slightly onto the back tyre so that you have sufficient space to remove those top shock bolts. Now, I would advise caution whilst doing this, because the only thing that is basically holding that rear mudguard onto the bike is the wiring loom, and you don't want to damage that. So just be aware of that and be careful not to put too much pressure on it while you're moving that rear mudguard around. Now, your bike should be installed on its centre stand while you're doing this, and only remove and refit one shock at a time. Don't try removing both shocks and then refitting both shocks, that won't end well. You can then unfasten the bottom shock mounting bolt, which actually withdraws outwards away from the bike, which makes things a little bit easier. But be aware, you will need a slim open-ended spanner on the left-hand side of the bike in order to secure the nut and stop it from spinning while you're unfastening the left-hand side lower shock mount bolt. Now, in an ideal world, it may be judicious to remove the rear wheel and the rear brake disc caliper in order to be able to do this easily, but the situation I was in, that just wasn't an option, and it is doable without disturbing any of that. Just make sure that you retrieve the nut and the washer, which is in a very tight space between the bracket and the disc caliper bracket, and put it to one side, because obviously you're going to need that for reinstallation. And once you've done that, you should be free to remove the left-hand shock absorber. And of course, replace it with your new shock absorber. Occasionally when fitting new shocks, you do find there's a slight mismatch in length which can make fitting a little bit awkward. You need to do a bit of jiggling about to get them in. I found the HAGON shocks were exactly the same length as the originals, so it was fairly simple and straightforward to get them into the brackets. Now, once you've got the shock properly seated, it's time to replace the fasteners, and this is where the fun and games start. The top one is pretty easy and straightforward, but in preparation you might want to select some of your favourite swear words for the bottom one. Now, getting the bolt in isn't a problem, it's getting the washer and the nut back on at the back that is the difficult bit, because there's very little clearance for your fingers, although I do have extra large fingers, so you might find it a little bit easier. So it may take more than one or two attempts to correctly thread the washer and the nut back onto the thread of the bolt. It is doable, it can be done. It's just a bit frustrating. Once again, you are going to need a very slim open-ended spanner to hold that nut in place once you've got it threaded on, in order to stop it spinning while you fasten the bolt up. But I think all in all, this is the most difficult part of the whole fitting. Now, the rear brake hose and the wiring for the ABS sensor are situated underneath this nut, so be very careful not to damage them during this procedure. It struck me that there would actually have been better over the top of this nut, but Royal Enfield have chosen to put them underneath it, and there certainly wasn't enough slack for me to change its position, so that's the way it is. It's one of those jobs where care and patience is a virtue, and really, when you've got past this point, you're home and free with this job. Once you've done this, you can then go ahead and replace the top shock bolt, which for some reason I forgot to film. And then it's time to move over to the right hand side, which is much easier and straightforward. Now, the top shock bolt is just the same as the other side. You just need to manipulate the rear mudguard out of the way so you can withdraw that bolt inwards. And the bottom shock bolt likewise is also much easier than the left hand side. For a start, you have a lot more clearance, and rather than a fiddly little nut, you actually have a threaded bracket which holds the chain guard in place. So all you have to do is remove both of those bolts and you're then free to swap the shock absorber. Now obviously you need to take note where all your washers and spring washers etc. go throughout this operation. I won't bore you with going into intricate detail of each one. All that is then left to do is replace all the fasteners and secure your rear mudguard back in place, which is the reverse of taking them off. And again, I'm not going to bore you with all that because that also involved refitting my pannier racks. If you got them off, you can get them back on again. One little bit of advice when fitting new shocks. Obviously, when they're in storage and when they're in transit, they're in a box and they're laid down on their side, which means the damping oil inside there will have spread out along the entire length of the shock, rather than sitting in the bottom where it's meant to be to effectively control your damping. So once you've got your shocks fitted, leave the bike for at least an hour so that that oil can drain back down to where it needs to be, and then sit on your bike and pump those rear shocks a few times just to release any air bubbles from the damping system. It's not crucial because these things will sort themselves out in time while you're riding the bike anyway. It's just good practice. And it does of course ensure that your damping system will function optimally from the word go. I will leave the contact details for HAGON shocks in the video description down below. Don't forget their website is out of action for some remedial work at the moment, so email and telephone are the only ways of contacting them until they get that sorted. But obviously these fitting instructions will apply exactly the same for any other shocks you decide to fit to your Bullet. I would recommend, if you're doing this job, to allow yourself an hour, maybe an hour and a half work time. But just to be on the safe side so you don't find yourself getting into a bit of a panic, do not promise the missus that you'll take her shoe and clothes shopping thinking that it's only going to be a 20-minute job, because life rarely works out like that. Once again, thank you so much for watching this video and my other videos, and in doing so helping to support this channel. I really do appreciate it. I'd also appreciate it if you would leave a like. Now don't forget, 8 out of 10 pig farmers recommend this channel. So don't be shy, no one's going to judge you. Feel free to subscribe to this channel, and if you do subscribe, don't forget to hit the notification bell, and of course ensure that all your notifications are enabled. That's it from me for this week. I am of course going to be back next week, so until then, if you're riding, please ride safely, and I'll see you soon.